Every January, the small Swiss mountain town of Davos transforms into the epicenter of global discourse. Here, the World Economic Forum convenes its annual meeting, a gathering unlike any other. For 2026, the 56th iteration of this summit, held from January 19th to the 23rd, is operating under the hopeful theme, A Spirit of Dialogue. This year's event has drawn an unprecedented number of participants, a clear signal of the perceived urgency of the challenges at hand. Organizers have confirmed that close to 3,000 leaders from business, government, and civil society are in attendance. This remarkable figure includes a record-breaking contingent of political leaders, with over 60 heads of state and government making the journey to the Swiss Alps to engage in critical conversations about our shared future. The sheer scale of the attendance underscores the gravity of the global moment. Beyond the heads of state, the guest list is a veritable who's who of global influence. More than 850 top company bosses representing the world's most powerful corporations are present to discuss economic strategy and corporate responsibility. They are joined by over 100 technology pioneers, the architects of our digital age, whose innovations are rapidly reshaping every facet of modern life. This year, there is also a significant and intentional shift in representation. Notably, around half of the attending leaders hail from the Global South. This deliberate inclusion aims to ensure that diverse economic, social, and regional perspectives are not just heard, but are central to the dialogues, reflecting the increasingly pivotal role that emerging markets play in global growth and geopolitics. The discussions are structured around 5 key pillars, which serve as the thematic backbone for the week's intense schedule of panels, workshops, and bilateral meetings. The first is cooperation in a contested world. The second, unlocking new sources of growth, points to the economic anxieties stemming from slowing productivity and high debt. The third pillar, investing in people, addresses the profound societal shifts caused by technological disruption and demographic changes. The fourth, deploying innovation responsibly, places a laser focus on the ethical guardrails needed for technologies like AI. Finally, building prosperity within planetary boundaries tackles the existential challenge of climate change and environmental sustainability, seeking a path to economic well-being that does not come at the planet's expense. Among the most anticipated attendees is former U.S. President Donald Trump, who is making his first in-person appearance at the forum since 2020. His presence, leading what the WEF has described as the largest U.S. delegation yet, injects a significant and unpredictable variable into the proceedings. His past addresses have often challenged the globalist consensus that Davos typically represents, and his current visit comes amid strained relations with some traditional European allies. His wide-ranging remarks are expected to touch on everything from trade and tariffs, AI development, and migration, setting a distinct tone for discussions on America's role in the world. His participation guarantees that the forum will be a stage for competing visions of global order, making the theme of a spirit of dialogue both more challenging and more essential than ever. If one were to capture the prevailing atmosphere at Davos 2026, in a single phrase, it would be pragmatic risk management, The buoyant optimism that characterized the pre-2020 forums, with their focus on boundless growth and technological utopianism, has been supplanted by a more sober, cautious, and frankly anxious mood. The primary narrative weaving through the corridors and conference halls is no longer about transformation for its own sake, but about navigating a world beset by overlapping crises. The dominant theme is one of managing disruption in a fractured world, a clear recognition that stability has become a more pressing priority than unbridled expansion. Leaders are less focused on celebrating opportunities and more concerned with mitigating a formidable list of threats that span the geopolitical, technological, and societal spheres. geopolitical, technological, societal. This shift in tone is a direct reflection of a global landscape that feels increasingly unstable and unpredictable. The post-Cold War consensus on a rules-based international order appears to be fraying at the seams, and urging middle powers to band together to counteract the destabilizing effects of great power rivalry. This fracturing is visible in the ongoing war in Ukraine, persistent conflicts in the Middle East, and the deep-seated strategic rivalry between the United States and China. The forum's agenda is saturated with discussions on how to build resilience in this new reality, focusing on strategies like nearshoring and friendshoring to secure vital supply chains. The technological frontier, once a source of almost universal excitement, is now viewed with a potent mix of awe and apprehension. Artificial intelligence in particular dominates the agenda, but the conversation has pivoted sharply from hype to governance. Leaders are grappling with how to manage the profound risks associated with frontier AI models, including the potential for massive white-collar job displacement, the concentration of immense power in a few tech firms, and the acute threat of deepfakes undermining democratic elections. The urgent need for global coordination on AI regulation is a constant refrain, with warnings that a patchwork of local rules, such as the 1,200 separate bills currently moving through U.S. state legislatures, could stifle innovation while failing to address systemic dangers. Ultimately, the spirit of Davos 2026 is one of reluctant acceptance. There is an acknowledgement that the world has fundamentally changed, and the old models of cooperation are no longer sufficient. Calls for reforming global institutions like the World Bank and the IMF are louder than ever, driven by the need to address high sovereign debt and finance a colossal energy transition. The high interest rate environment is increasingly accepted as a new normal. The overall mood is not one of despair, but of determined, clear-eyed realism. The task at hand, as framed by the leaders gathered here, is not to dream of a perfect world, but to build a more resilient and stable one from the fractured pieces of the present. Table of Contents, Part 2, Act 1, Global Economy and Geopolitics. 1. The Great Fracture, Navigating a World of Competing Blocks. 2. The Debt Dilemma, Fiscal Stress in an Age of Uncertainty. 3. Remapping the Flow, The Push for Resilient Supply Chains. 4. Flashpoints and Fault Lines, Geopolitical Instability Takes Center Stage. The defining economic discussion at Davos 2026 revolves around a concept that has moved from the fringes of academic debate to the center of global strategy: fragmented globalization. The long-held assumption of an increasingly integrated world, bound by shared economic interests and a common set of rules, is now seen as a relic of a bygone era. Leaders gathered in the Swiss Alps are openly grappling with the reality of a global economy splintering into competing economic blocs, each coalescing around a great power. This fracture is most evident in the deepening strategic rivalry between the United States and China, a contest that extends far beyond trade tariffs into the realms of technology standards, financial systems, and ideological influence. The conversation is no longer about how to deepen integration, but how to manage the separation and de-risk exposure to rival blocs, without triggering a full-blown economic collapse. For decades, business strategy was predicated on optimizing global value chains for maximum efficiency, often by concentrating production in single regions like China. Now, the calculus has shifted from efficiency to resilience. Corporate leaders and government officials are engaged in intense dialogue about the new geography of global commerce. The emergence of distinct spheres of influence means that access to markets, access to technology, and access to capital can no longer be taken for granted. Countries are being implicitly, and sometimes explicitly, forced to choose sides, creating immense pressure on middle powers and emerging economies. This geopolitical sorting is creating a more complex and hazardous environment for international trade and investment. The theme of a spirit of dialogue is being tested most severely in this context. While the official goal is to foster cooperation, many sessions are dominated by the practical challenges of navigating this contested world. Discussions are focused on creating frameworks for coexistence between these competing systems, searching for limited areas of collaboration, such as climate change and pandemic preparedness, that can be walled off from the broader strategic competition. However, there is a palpable sense of pessimism about the prospects for a grand bargain. The language used is one of containment and management, not resolution. The rise of industrial policy, strategic subsidies, and technology export controls are accepted as features, not bugs, of this new era, as nations prioritize security and self-sufficiency over the principles of free trade. Leaders at Davos are wrestling with this new reality, where economic decisions are inextricably linked with geopolitical allegiance. The primary challenge, as framed in numerous panels, is how to prevent this economic fragmentation from spiraling into outright conflict, maintaining a delicate balance in a world that feels increasingly divided against itself. Beneath the surface of high-level geopolitical strategy lies a more immediate and pervasive threat discussed with grave concern at Davos: the staggering levels of sovereign debt. The era of cheap money, which fueled government spending for over a decade, has come to an abrupt end. Now, a high-interest rate environment, increasingly accepted as the new normal, is exposing fiscal vulnerabilities across the globe. Warnings about fiscal stress are a constant refrain, applying not only to traditionally vulnerable emerging economies, but also to major developed nations. The pandemic-era stimulus packages, combined with the costs of the energy crisis and increased military spending, have left public balance sheets stretched to their breaking point. The dilemma is particularly acute for the countries of the Global South. They are facing a potential lost decade of development. Many of these nations borrowed heavily in dollars when interest rates were low. Now, the combination of a strong dollar and high borrowing costs is creating a perfect storm. A significant portion of their national budgets is being diverted from essential services like healthcare and education simply to service their external debt. This is not just an economic problem. It is a major source of social and political instability. Leaders from these regions are using the Davos platform to make urgent calls for reform of the global financial architecture. They argue that institutions like the World Bank and the IMF are ill-equipped to handle a systemic debt crisis of this magnitude. Even in the developed world, the fiscal situation is precarious. The United States, Europe, and Japan are all confronting the long-term consequences of aging populations. They place immense strain on pension and healthcare systems. The political will to implement necessary austerity measures or raise taxes is weak, especially in an environment of heightened polarization and social discontent. This creates a dangerous dynamic where governments continue to run large deficits, accumulating debt that becomes ever more expensive to service. Economists at the forum are warning that this path is unsustainable. A future fiscal crisis in a major economy could have catastrophic ripple effects across the global financial system. The conversation is about when, not if, a reckoning will come and how to prepare for its impact. Proposals range from the technical, such as developing more sophisticated blended finance models, to the deeply political, like wealth taxes and major entitlement reforms. The underlying challenge is a lack of global consensus and trust. The high-debt, high-interest rate environment constrains governments' ability to respond to the next crisis, whether it be another pandemic, a climate disaster, or a geopolitical conflict. The mood at Davos reflects this reality, a deep-seated anxiety that the world is operating with a dangerously thin fiscal buffer at a time of maximum uncertainty. The era of optimizing supply chains for cost and efficiency, above all else, is definitively over. The fragility of this model was brutally exposed first by the COVID-19 pandemic and then by geopolitical shocks. And the key takeaway for leaders at Davos 2026 is the urgent need for resilience. The dominant strategies being discussed are: nearshoring involves relocating production facilities closer to home markets, reducing dependence on long and vulnerable shipping lanes. Nearshoring example, Mexico. Nearshoring example, Eastern Europe. Nearshoring example, Southeast Asia. Friendshoring takes this a step further, advocating for supply chains to be reconfigured among networks of allied and politically aligned countries. These strategies represent a seismic shift in global economic geography, moving away from a purely market-driven logic to one that prioritizes security, stability, and geopolitical alignment over pure cost advantage. This strategic reorientation is most pronounced in critical industries: semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, renewable energy components, and critical minerals. Governments are no longer passive observers. They are active participants, using industrial policy, massive subsidies, and other incentives to encourage domestic production and secure supplies from trusted partners. The conversation at Davos is less about whether this is a good idea and more about how to manage its implementation. There is a recognition that this process will be inflationary, at least in the short term, as building redundant and geographically diverse supply chains is inherently more expensive. However, the push for resilient supply chains is not without its critics and complexities. Leaders from many emerging economies express concern that friendshoring could devolve into a new form of protectionism. They worry that they will be locked out of the new, fragmented value chains, hindering their development prospects. This highlights a central tension at the forum: the desire of major powers to de-risk their economies versus the desire of the global South for inclusive growth. There are active debates about how to ensure that the reconfiguration of supply chains does not leave developing nations behind, but instead creates new opportunities for them. Ultimately, the remaking of global supply chains is a messy, expensive, and politically charged process. It requires immense private and public investment in infrastructure, technology, and workforce skills. The discussions at Davos 2026 reflect this complex reality, showcasing a world in the midst of a fundamental rewiring of the very arteries of global commerce, a process that will define the economic landscape for decades to come. While economic anxieties are pervasive at Davos, they are constantly overshadowed by the raw and immediate threat of geopolitical instability. The serene mountain setting provides a stark contrast to a world map dotted with active conflicts and simmering tensions. The ongoing war in Ukraine continues to cast a long shadow, serving as a brutal reminder of the return of great power conflict to the European continent. Discussions are focused not only on the immense human tragedy, but also on the war's cascading effects on global energy markets, food security, and the international legal order. There is a grim acceptance that the conflict has become a protracted struggle, fundamentally altering Europe's security architecture and forcing a sustained, costly military and industrial mobilization that few had anticipated just a few years ago. Adding to the sense of crisis are the persistent and volatile conflicts across the Middle East. The forum's decision to disinvite the Iranian foreign minister, citing the tragic loss of lives of civilians, underscores the intractability of regional tensions. The situation is seen as a tinderbox, with the potential for localized conflicts to escalate and draw in regional and global powers, further disrupting energy supplies and shipping routes. The instability in the Middle East is not viewed in isolation, but as part of the broader erosion of global order, where regional actors feel more emboldened to pursue their interests aggressively. The most significant and structural source of instability, however, remains the strategic rivalry between the United States and China. This is the central fault line around which much of the new global order is organizing. Every aspect of the relationship, from trade and technology to military posturing in the South China Sea, is a subject of intense discussion and concern. The attendance of a large U.S. delegation, including former President Trump, whose approach to China has been confrontational, adds another layer of unpredictability. European and Asian leaders are particularly focused on avoiding being caught in the crossfire, seeking to carve out a path that preserves both their economic interests and their strategic autonomy. The fear is that a miscalculation or an accident could easily escalate into a direct confrontation, with consequences that would dwarf any other current crisis. This trifecta of instability in Ukraine, the Middle East, and the U.S.-China relationship creates a backdrop of profound uncertainty for all other discussions at Davos. It undermines confidence, deters long-term investment, and diverts resources and political capital away from other pressing global challenges like climate change and poverty. The theme, a spirit of dialogue, feels less like a celebration of cooperation and more like a desperate plea for de-escalation. The overriding sentiment among leaders is that the world is more dangerous and less predictable than at any time in recent memory. The primary geopolitical task, as framed at Davos 2026, is not to solve these conflicts, but to manage and contain them, preventing the flashpoints from igniting a wider global conflagration. The conversation around artificial intelligence at Davos 2026 has definitively moved beyond the initial awe and speculative hype. The central, most urgent topic is now governance. As AI reshapes economies and societies with unprecedented speed, a palpable sense of anxiety permeates discussions among global leaders. The core challenge is how to ensure that regulation, ethics, and innovation can move in step. The fear is that powerful frontier models are being developed and deployed far faster than our collective ability to understand and control their consequences. This has created a frantic race to establish effective guardrails before an irreversible event occurs, involving policymakers, tech leaders, and civil society. A significant point of contention is the very structure of governance. The debate is split between a global coordinated approach and national or regional frameworks. Proponents of global standards argue that since AI is a borderless technology, a patchwork of inconsistent rules will be ineffective and could lead to a race to the bottom. The United States, for instance, is already facing an internal challenge, with one expert warning that over 1,200 different AI-related bills are currently working their way through its 50 state legislatures. This internal fragmentation is a microcosm of the global challenge, threatening to stifle innovation while failing to address systemic risks. The tech titans themselves are active participants: NVIDIA, Microsoft, Google DeepMind, and Mistral AI. While they are keen to showcase their latest advancements, they are also under intense scrutiny to demonstrate their commitment to safety and ethical development. Their presence at Davos is a tightrope walk. They must project confidence in their ability to manage their creations while acknowledging the profound societal risks involved. The dialogue is focused on practical measures: third-party auditing, red teaming, and clear lines of accountability for when AI systems cause harm. Ultimately, the governance gauntlet is about restoring trust. Trust from the public that AI will be a force for good, not a tool for oppression or chaos. Trust from governments that tech companies are acting as responsible stewards of this transformative power. And trust between nations, which is necessary to prevent an all-out AI arms race. The discussions at Davos 2026 are a critical stress test for the theme of a spirit of dialogue. Finding a viable path forward for AI governance is seen not just as a technical or policy challenge, but as a fundamental test of whether global cooperation is still possible in a fractured world. The stakes are incredibly high, as the decisions made here could shape the trajectory of human development for generations to come. Well, While much of the AI discussion at Davos focuses on immediate, practical concerns, a more profound and unsettling conversation is taking place about the long-term horizon, the potential arrival of artificial general intelligence, or AGI. This is when an AI would surpass humans across a wide range of tasks. The topic, once confined to science fiction, has now entered mainstream elite discourse. Leaders face a daunting dual reality. AGI could unlock solutions to humanity's greatest challenges, like disease and climate change. But it could also pose an existential risk if its goals are not aligned with ours. One of the most immediate and tangible impacts of artificial intelligence discussed at Davos 2026 is its profound disruption of the labor market. Unlike previous waves of automation that primarily affected blue-collar and manual labor, the current AI revolution is aimed squarely at white-collar professional service jobs. Lawyers, accountants, software developers, writers, analysts are all finding that cognitive tasks once considered uniquely human can now be performed, at least in part, by sophisticated AI models. This has triggered deep concern among policymakers and business leaders about the potential for mass job displacement and the hollowing out of the professional middle class. Corporate leaders are openly discussing how generative AI can be integrated into workflows to dramatically boost productivity and so. But this efficiency gain comes with a human cost. The focus at Davos is on managing this transition without causing widespread social upheaval. There is a strong push for the rapid development and deployment of large-scale reskilling and upskilling frameworks to help workers adapt to a world where their primary value is not in performing routine cognitive tasks, but in collaborating with AI systems. However, creating these reskilling frameworks is a monumental challenge. It requires unprecedented collaboration between governments, educational institutions, and the private sector. The consensus is moving toward an emphasis on uniquely human capabilities, such as critical thinking, creativity, emotional intelligence, and complex problem solving. If large segments of the population feel left behind by technological progress, it could fuel further social polarization and inequality, and a backlash against technology itself. Leaders are debating the need for stronger social safety nets, new models of education, and perhaps even a fundamental rethinking of the relationship between work, income, and identity. The challenge is not just to manage the economic disruption caused by AI, but to do so in a way that reinforces social cohesion and ensures that the benefits of this powerful new technology are shared broadly across society. Among the most acute and widely recognized dangers of artificial intelligence is its potential to undermine democracy itself. This concern has taken center stage at Davos 2026, where misinformation and deep fakes are now officially listed among the top global risks. With major elections scheduled in numerous countries, the threat is no longer theoretical, but immediate and existential. Leaders are expressing deep alarm about the ability of malicious actors, both foreign and domestic, to use generative AI to create highly realistic and convincing fake audio, video, and text content. This technology can be weaponized to impersonate political candidates, spread inflammatory lies, and sow chaos and distrust in the electoral process on an unprecedented scale. This creates a deeply asymmetric challenge for democratic societies. It is far easier, cheaper, and faster to create and disseminate convincing falsehoods than it is to verify facts and restore public trust. In response, there is a major push for a multi-pronged defense strategy. This includes calls for stronger cooperation between governments and social media companies to rapidly identify and label or remove synthetic media. Tech leaders are being pressed to build more robust watermarking and content provenance technologies. Furthermore, there is a strong emphasis on public education and media literacy campaigns to create a more discerning and resilient citizenry. The issue of election integrity is intertwined with the broader theme of declining trust in institutions. When citizens cannot be sure if what they are seeing and hearing from their leaders is real, the very foundation of public discourse crumbles. The conversations at Davos reflect a grim consensus. Protecting elections in the age of AI requires a new social contract involving technology platforms, governments, and the public. It is a battle for the future of digital trust. As the 56th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum draws to a close, the dominant narrative emerging from the snowy peaks of Davos is one of sober realism and urgent risk management. The official theme, a spirit of dialogue, served less as a celebration and more as a necessary prescription for a world teetering on the edge. The overarching story of Davos 2026 is managing disruption in a fractured world. Leaders are no longer focused on chasing boundless growth. They're focused on building resilience against a formidable array of interconnected threats: geopolitical conflict, technological upheaval, climate change, social fragmentation. Artificial intelligence is now understood as a force that will fundamentally reshape power, jobs, and geopolitics. The climate transition is accepted as inevitable and a massive economic opportunity. Yet there is deep frustration with its dangerously slow pace. Global cooperation, the foundation of the Davos ideal, is seen to be weakening, strained by great power rivalry and rising nationalism. Beneath it all lies a deep anxiety about societies under stress, squeezed by rapid technological change, widening inequality, and challenging demographic shifts that are fraying the social fabric. In charting a path forward from Davos 2026, the emphasis is on tangible next steps. The first and most immediate priority is to accelerate efforts toward international AI governance. A second critical action item is the implementation of targeted climate finance mechanisms. Third, leaders have committed to accelerating the push for supply chain resilience. Finally, the path forward includes a determined effort to protect democracy and reinforce social stability. The ultimate message from Davos 2026 is a call for a new, risk-focused cooperation. In a fractured and unpredictable world, survival and prosperity depend not on a shared ideology, but on a pragmatic shared interest in managing common threats together. And, well, that is the clear, practical charge leaders are taking away. The primary takeaway: the coming years will be defined not by utopian visions, but by the difficult collaborative work of managing profound and unavoidable disruption. So, yeah, that's the hard reality people are taking home.